This podcast is brought to you by the School of Advanced Study, University of London.
Thanks very much. Hello everyone, good morning. Thanks for inviting me to give this talk. It's going to be less of a talk and hopefully more of a two-way conversation, because I'd be interested to hear about your experiences of this strange world of academic publishing. And I think the reason that I've been asked to give the talk, as was just set out, and the reason that I'm in my current job is because I published quite a lot during my thesis. I published 3 articles, and I'm currently working on 4 more, and I've got a book contract. So I've had some experience, but I'm only a couple of years post-PhD. Okay, so I'm kind of remember all the pressures that you feel upon your shoulders as a PhD student, and the difficulties of balancing research, teaching, other jobs, family, friends. All those things are really important. So I'm going to give you a bit of information about why it's important to publish, and then talk about how to actually go about getting published, hopefully some more resources there. And then I'd like to end by talking a bit more about current debates and the future of academic publishing. And it's great to have Charles Forsyth here, hopefully be able to chip in at some point. Before we go any further, could I just find out a bit more about you? Who's in the first year of the PhD or Masters? Okay, and second year? And third year and beyond? Okay, so we've got quite a mix here. And who has already published something? Who's already published something? Being very shy.
Reviews, not
Reviews, okay. And Charles is okay, well, please put your hand up and ask any questions, or just ask questions as we go through. So, firstly, why publish? Obviously, if you want an academic career, publishing is part and parcel of an academic career. It's also part and parcel of building up your CV before you start applying for jobs. But for me personally, publishing, getting my work published was a really great way of getting feedback on my work and having a conversation with academics from outside my own institution, opening up the conversation beyond me and my supervisors or me and my direct peers within Oxford. It builds up your professional network. It puts your work out there. It begins conversations with people who may be your future colleagues, and that's really important. And the last 2 points here are the reasons why your employers are going to be so eagerly looking at your lists of publications is what's called the Research Excellence Framework, the REF. Is this something that's familiar to you? Some of you? All of you? Okay, well, as you know then, the Research Excellence Framework, the last one took place in 2014, and the results will be announced later this year. And this is the UK system for assessing universities' research outputs. So all universities have to submit the total research that's been done by their employees, and that is then assessed, and the university departments are given a kind of a star rating depending on the quality of their research. This is important for us as early career researchers. This is the sort of thing you'll be asked about at academic job interviews. I've been through several academic job interviews in the last year, and at each one I was asked about how my work was internationally significant. Okay, that's REF terminology. And also, particularly at Westminster, I think the staff were interested in how my work would fit within their ref narrative. Westminster has a particular specialism in Francophone Africa. That's my area of research. So it was seen that my work would fit within the narrative that they then put forward late last year as part of their ref submission. And that's quite a change of mindset, as going from a doctoral researcher to thinking about yourself in those bigger institutional frameworks. And it's quite difficult sometimes. The last point here, the impact agenda. Could anyone suggest what the impact agenda might pertain to? Yeah, Charlotte?
Outreach projects, community, liaising with the world outside academia.
Yeah. So the impact agenda is part of the REF as of last year, I think, for the first time.
It's sort of brought into mid-cycle, but this is the first time it's being assessed.
Okay.
It was sort of announced in 2009, so but it's and it's worth about 20% of the total. But can I just chip in?
Yeah, I think so.
Because it's a really important question, because you've got all those terms like public understanding, knowledge exchange, knowledge transfer, dissemination, outreach, and it has impact as well. And the specific thing about impact is that it has to be, you have to demonstrate a direct link to research. So we might go and talk in general about Algerian film or Asian culture, and you do it at all sorts of levels. You might do it in schools, you might do it as amateur but informed members of the public. But the thing about impact is you have to demonstrate it's linked to research at a certain quality level. So it's quite it's another sort of step in that whole process.
Yeah.
What are we going to call it? Knowledge transfer, knowledge exchange.
Yeah.
It's really important. And you're quite right, it's not going to go away.
It's
deeply political.
Yeah, there's lots of debate. There's lots of debate around impact. Again, I was asked in a job interview last week what the impact of my research would be. Okay, so there's things to think about. But I think when it comes to the REF, what institutions submit are impact case studies, which are kind of group collaborative examples of impact. At Westminster, for example, Westminster has a partnership with museums and galleries in London, providing foreign language material to those institutions, and I think that was put forward as part of an impact case study. So another thing to bear in mind. I know that it's quite an international group today, so I'd be interested maybe at the end to hear about any contrasts or parallels with your countries. So, as I said at the beginning, all these things conspire to put pressure upon us when we already have lots of other pressures on us as early career researchers and as PhD students. And it's really important to try and keep a balance between these things. When do we publish? When to think about publishing? I did a very unscientific bit of research for this presentation. I sent a questionnaire to 8 of my friends, and I got 6 replies from early career peers. And this is, one of them said, I felt pressure to publish during the very final stages of the thesis, partly because it would help with applications for the next stage, and mostly because it was only then that I had a clear sense of what my contribution might be and felt more confident about my research. In reality, it was only after the Viva that I felt ready to publish. This might be something that chimes with some of you. It's a question of authority. When do we feel like we have enough knowledge to put something out there into the world, something that we want to stand by that will be there in print? And this is where we can be strategic. I think it's important to publish sooner rather than later. If it might be in a book review, it might be in something short, something quite discreet. You don't need to put out there the whole theoretical argument of your thesis. But when it comes to applying for jobs in your 3rd and 4th year, having some publications is becoming pretty much essential, let's say. remember that your priority though is the thesis, and your supervisors, I'm sure, will say that to you as well. My sense is that publications can be part of the process of writing the thesis. Okay, getting that feedback. Thinking, in my case, 2 of my first publications came out of conference papers and then developed into chapters of the thesis. So it can be part of the same process of writing and researching the thesis if you do things strategically. So what to publish? As someone's already said that they started with book reviews. Did you have a good experience with doing the book review? Did you find it useful?
Yeah, I found it very helpful. I had a way of forcing myself to read whole books as well.
And free books.
And free books, yeah.
Yeah. So it's a great way to get your name known to a journal editor as well. Journals are always looking for reviewers. And you can approach the journals with a suggestion of a book that you've noticed has just come out that you'd like to review, and they will then go about getting hold of a copy of it, sending that copy to you, and then you write a review, which doesn't take more than a week, really, to read the book and then to think about it and write 500 to 700 words, summarising, engaging with a couple of the main arguments. And thinking about who the possible readership could be for the book. Okay, so book reviews, conference reports. Again, I'm sure there'll be a conference report after today. And then moving on, because those first 2 wouldn't count for a ref submission. So academic journal articles, book chapters in edited volumes would be classed as submissions for a ref. And I'll talk a bit more about how you go about sending a journal article in a moment. One thing to note is, again, about being strategic, about choosing the journal that you submit to, because some journals are more recognised than others in the field, obviously, and this is something that you can talk to your supervisors about. It's also important to subscribe to updates to the main journals in your field, so that you get a sense of the current debates, the style of that journal, what they're looking for. There's no point in sending a journal article to a journal which never publishes anything very historical if your work is extremely historical. Okay, and vice versa if it's extremely theoretical. Book chapters, as for journal articles, really, you can keep an eye out for calls for contributions. And book chapters, edited volumes often come out of conferences. So if you're giving a conference paper, it's worth asking if there's going to be a publication. One thing to bear in mind is the importance of peer review in edited volumes. Sometimes a conference proceedings will come out without a process of peer review. Is everyone okay with the term peer review? Yeah, the idea that your work will be read by a group of peers and you will have feedback before it then goes forward to be published. So you need to think about whether it's worth committing time to putting your work forward in conference proceedings where there isn't a process of peer review. Maybe something to steer clear of if you're tight on time. And then a monograph, obviously coming out with the thesis, and I can talk a bit more about that maybe at the end if anyone has questions about monograph publishing. And lastly on this list, blogging, websites and social media. Does anyone here blog? Have an academic blog? There's a couple. Sorry, I'm not going to pick on anyone. And does anyone read academic blogs of the PhD? Yeah, lots of people. Well, there's still a question mark over whether digital content will be part of the next ref. The next ref is in 2020. But certainly, in terms of giving visibility to your work, academic blogging can be really, really helpful, along with Twitter and Facebook and other forms of social media. There's a couple of examples that I put up here, and just to give you a sense of one of them, if the internet's working. So this is a blog of a PhD student from Royal Holloway, which is a really good example of how she's integrated the different stages of her research with regular posts. And this is something that a potential employer would be interested to look at, I can imagine. And also sets up the possibility of international collaborations as well. In terms of publishing online and social media, though, this again takes a lot of time out of your schedule. So a couple more views from my peers. I've found social media to be useful not so much for the nuts and bolts of my research, but for advice and support on the processes of PhD writing, the viva, job applications, publication, etc. There's a good community of academics on Twitter who write useful and illuminating blog articles, share tips, and generally let you know that everyone's been there. And another sort of contrasting view, blogging can be a way of thinking through research ideas, but you might also want to keep the professional and the private separate. If you can persuade your faculty to give you a profile page on the website, that would be a great place to start. And I definitely agree with that. We had to ask in Oxford in my first year if we could have faculty pages for the PhD students, and the faculty were really supportive. It doesn't cost them hardly anything. An administrator spends a morning setting it up, and then you have a profile, a presence, which is linked into the university. And especially if you're doing research or fieldwork abroad, to be able to direct people towards your institutional page is really important. So that's something worth asking about. Also, academia.edu, which some people might know of, which is a sort of Facebook of the academic world, but where you can also put your work as well. There's copyright issues to be taken into account with academia. Show of hands, who's on academia.edu? Oh, loads of people. And have you found it helpful? Has it been something that's...
Looks like a really good idea.
Use LinkedIn as well, though. All it is operationality. So you use it LinkedIn with a connection to a departmental page.
Yeah.
I don't know other people do that.
Has anyone?
Makes people upload articles, so you can read people's theses as well. It's quite good.
Yeah.
Alerts when adding emails.
Yeah, go on.
Yeah, I was just going to say we can search by sort of research interest, so I guess it would be a good way of finding people. I don't upload anything on there, kind of just put on, say I've done this conference, I've done that one, and this is what my research is about, and maybe I just have my friends on there. But I think you can upload sort of keywords and you click on it, and then people sort of with similar research interests would then come up. I guess you could get into them that way.
I suppose it's another form of having visibility. I gave a talk like this a couple of weeks ago at Westminster. That's why it's looking a bit corporate, my presentation, sorry about that. And I gave it with someone from the law faculty who puts all his work on his Academia Edu page, even things which have been published in peer-reviewed journals. And he says he gets over 4,000 people looking at them through that portal. And this...
So I think one of the big issues when you talk about it's open access.
Yeah.
You put working papers on, but in a lot of cases, as soon as something's published, there's going to be quite, you either can't put it included on there, or there's an embargo period of a couple of years.
Yeah.
So yeah, but no, I can see all the benefits.
Oh, yeah.
But I think in some areas that there's such a more active culture of open access. As soon as something's published, it's available publicly and not just to subscribers.
Yeah, it's a disciplinary contrast, maybe. Yeah. Well, we'll come back to open access in a moment. So, how do you actually go about getting something published? Well, as I've already said, first enjoy your research and enjoy writing about it. Don't lose track of why you actually began the PhD process in the first place. Go to conferences such as this one here. I think I went to about 10 conferences during the PhD. Didn't give papers at all of them, not by a long stretch, and 2 publications came out of those conferences. So it could be a really good way of building up connections. Join associations and professional organisations. I'm sure you're all members of the Society of French Studies. The Society of Francophone Post-Colonial Studies, I'll make a plug for, and the Association for the Study of Contemporary and Modern France. And these all have reduced postgraduate rates, and you get publications coming to your doorstep from them. And yeah, thoroughly a good thing to support. You can get more involved in those associations by standing for election on their executive committees, offering to organise workshops or a panel at a conference. And that's something that I did through the Society of Francophone Post-Colonial Studies from the first year of my PhD, and it's been invaluable in terms of just having conversations with people who share your research interests. There's nothing better, really. And lastly, just to keep an eye out on these mailing lists for calls for papers, special issues, publications. So I've put the 3 main ones up here: Francophile at Liverpool, based at Liverpool, H France, and Fabula. If you go to the Fabula website, which is the main French hub for academic work in French studies, you can sign up to their weekly mailing list, which is really helpful. So that's pretty comprehensive with those 3. You might want to set up a separate email account, just not to flood your inbox. Okay, and when you actually want to send your work to a journal, the first point: only submit your work to one journal at a time, and this is an etiquette point more than anything, really. If a journal is sending your work out for peer review, that is a labour-intensive process. No one is getting paid at any point in this academic publishing cycle. And if they send it out for a review and then take the report back and then write to you and say, yes, we want to publish your article, and then you turn around and say, oh, no, I'm already publishing it somewhere else, that's not a good way to make friends in the academic world. Okay, I'm making the point quite strongly because when I gave the presentation 2 weeks ago, there was a journal editor there who made the point even more strongly. Okay, so you don't want to get blacklisted, basically. Use an appropriate register and structure for your chosen journal. That goes back to what I was saying about thinking strategically about which journal you're going to send your work to. Have a clear argument, a clear sense of what you're bringing to the field, and it might be something very discrete. It might just be one small case study from your thesis, which not much has been written about, and which you think brings something to the field, to your area of research. And the way to put that across is, again, to be clear in your title, to use your keywords in your abstract, in your introduction, and in your conclusion. That sounds very obvious, maybe a bit mechanical, but for a journal editor who's receiving lots and lots of articles, it's really helpful if they get a clear sense of what your work is going to be about, what your article is going to be about. Follow the journal's style guide, reference all sources, and lastly, stick to deadlines. Okay, in practice, most people don't stick to deadlines, but if you can get into good habits from the beginning, that would be appreciated. Okay, So here's an example of the long, drawn-out process of getting an article published. So this is a conference that I went to in Oxford in September 2012, the Crafts of World Literature conference. You can see this process has lasted 2 years almost. I was asked, I gave a paper about a Senegalese novelist, Malik Fall, and the way in which he'd been rejected by a major French publisher. And I talked about the readers' reports on this author. They liked the paper, and I was asked to participate in a special issue of a journal. And the people organising the conference asked me to submit an abstract. The editors then submit an outline of the proposed special issue to the Journal of Commonwealth Writing. So it had to be accepted, if you like, by 2 lots of editors. And the Journal of Commonwealth Writing accepted their proposal for a special issue. So they then wrote back to me. I submitted my revised paper in 2013, so over a year after I'd given the original paper. So I had quite a lot of time for these ideas to develop. I got responses from the readers' reports in December, just before Christmas, and I had to respond in a couple of months, so February this year. And I'm expecting the proofs any day now. And when you get the proofs, you can still make small changes, but because it's already been typeset, if you like, or even though it's all electronic these days, it's still only minor changes at that stage. And then the article will be published in 2014. Just a word about the readers' reports. That I've had different experiences with readers' reports. Sometimes they're really helpful, sometimes they're really short. I had 2 readers' reports for this article, and one was 1 line long and the other one was 2 pages long. And sometimes they will be very critical of your work, and you just have to grit your teeth and get on with things, get on with revising the article. And welcome those comments and that feedback, because someone has spent a lot of time. You know, someone has spent a day or a morning really thinking about your work and your argument and engaging with it, and that's something to welcome, even if that person is dissecting your argument in what you might feel to be quite a negative way. It's part of the academic debate, so try not to take it personally. Is what I'm trying to say. What to actually do with those criticisms? You don't have to accept all of the changes. Okay, it's fine to be selective, and it's fine to respond to your editors and explain why you don't want to accept those points. In fact, it's quite good to maybe number the main points that they've made, the suggested changes, and then when you write back to your editor, just set those out and say under each one in a couple of sentences how you've addressed that point or not addressed it and why. Okay, because that it shows quite clearly that you've thought about these comments and that you've integrated them or not, and that you're kind of in control of what you're doing with this piece of work. Okay, so coming on to open access and the future of academic publishing. And open access is an ongoing debate in current academic circles. It's something that Charles knows far more about than I do, but it basically refers to a shift in the model of funding academic publishing, because it means that peer-reviewed academic work will be provided and free of charge at the point of access. So currently libraries pay huge subscription fees to academic journals or journal portals like Muse and JSTOR so that we can read the articles. And the shift is there will no longer be a subscription model. Instead, each academic institution or funding body will pay for their publication. Okay, so there's a shift there, and this will obviously has an effect for us as early career researchers, and also for maybe emeritus researchers as well, people who don't necessarily have a secure institutional base yet. So it's a debate that's ongoing, and the current setup, as I see it, is that there's going to be two models. There's going to be gold standard open access and green open access. And gold open access means that your article will be immediately open access and open for anyone. And green means that it will be under embargo for 2 years, and then it will be open access. Quite what the implications of that kind of hierarchy between the immediately open access and that which is held back for 2 years is, I'm not quite sure what that relationship is. And there's been a lot of debate around open access, partly because I think it was felt that there was a lack of consultation to an extent, and the British Academy has got a book and a lot of resources on its website about the open access debate at the moment. I mean, in principle, it seems to me like a good idea to get our work out. If we want our work to have impact, to get our work out to as many people as possible. But it has effects also on things like learned societies who depend on the income generated by the subscription model. Questions which have not quite been resolved yet. Charles, I don't know if you want to add anything on open access.
I suppose the main thing is that this has been, in academic publishing, this has been around for a long time. Most academics have ignored it. But there's a group of radical sort of open access activists whose aim is that everything should be free at the point of publication. But then, as you say, you've got a number of other interest groups, primarily the publishers. The publishers aren't going to lose anything out every year. The learned societies like ours, we were to lose our royalties from our journal. They're currently we get 4 times the amount of income from royalties that we do from membership subscriptions. So it would be disastrous. But what it looks like now is that you're right. There's this balance between gold, which is the immediate availability, for which you pay what's called an article processing charge, which is between £1,500 and £2,000. Although for most article journals, or the green route, where it's published as part of a subscription journal, or what are called some hybrid journals, which depend partly on subscription, partly on people paying for their articles to be made available immediately. And then, as you say, in the arts and humanities, after 2 years, it becomes available free on the web. And it looks as though now, despite the concerns about 18 months ago, that the funding councils were going to push for everything to be gold open access. The majority of stuff will be green now. So, and the article processing charge will only be paid by people who've got research council grants. So that institutions will pay for things to be disseminated. So it's not as worrying as it looks. But you're dead right to pick it up, because I think in terms of making yourself employable, you need to make sure that what you're publishing is compliant with if you want to work in the UK, it is compliant with this policy. The majority of journals are, and there's room for manoeuvre around non-compliance, because I was saying to some people when we came in, I recently published a big journal in the States, and this is a national policy, publishing an international business, and there are some journals which just don't accept the principle of open access. So it's worthwhile bearing in mind. It only applies for this research excellence framework. It only applies to refereed journal articles and conference proceedings, but not really conference proceedings in the raw form you described, acte du beurre, which is very pretty rare now, even in France. For monographs, for articles, chapters in edited volumes, so they're currently not part of this policy, but there are very interesting trials going on around open access of monographs. And at the moment, the processing charge for a monograph, Manchester University Press, for example, is about £14,000. If you want a monograph to be available, open access, point of publication, and so not follow the usual commercial model.
So who would pay the 14?
Well, that's the question. You see, at the moment, the assumption is you'd only pay that if the research councils say that monographs published from research we've funded that has to be made available open access. Nobody at the moment, apart from the Wellcome Trust, nobody asks that. Now, it would be the institution that would have to pay that. But, just thinking that through, the implication is the collapse of the monograph as we know it. Although some people would say that's a logical progression of digital publishing anyway. But, so absolutely fascinating debates, but quite polarised.
Yeah.
And then you're dead right to bring it up, because that British Academy site's good. There's also the HEFI, so the Higher Education Funding Council for England, their site's got quite good information on it as well. Just the nuts and bolts of the But it's just one. It's like for anybody planning to work in UK academia, like the REF, the Research Excellence Framework. You just need to be aware. I presume, Ruth, at interviews nobody's asked you about open access.
No.
But they've asked you about REF, haven't they?
Yeah.
Either in coding ways or in crude.
But we're not very good.
Yeah, but I think that this is now, as you said, all this stuff around open access is going to be part of 2020 REF, so they're now sort of inextricably linked.
And that debate about the future of academic monographs is interesting. I feel like it puts into question the future of theses as well. I mean, to an extent, our theses are, in my institution, my thesis is open access. And that's not something that you have much control about over.
The alternative is we just think about, we as academics start thinking about different ways of collaborating, which don't necessarily involve publishers. And we go back to what was the original model in learned societies like French studies, where as was the case with Society for Francophone Postgraduate Studies, for years we just produced our own journal. And I used to go and deal with print, so we do everything: refereeing, typesetting, and printing off, and then actually going to have it produced and then distributed. It's very artisanal, but we had complete control over the product, and no publishers were making huge amounts of profit from it, which isn't really the case with our academics. No. All the medicine journals, So they're real. Because can I just say add one thing? Because the other thing I was going to mention, it was really helpful when you set out all the different types of publication. And the one thing that's always worth bearing in mind, and there are great examples of this, is postgraduates who set up their own journals. They're often web-based, but also thinking about, do you want to collate a volume as well? And if it's a decent volume, with good contributors, maybe a mixture of established scholars and postgraduates, publishers will be interested in that.
Yeah.
But I just think that there's been quite a lot of doom and gloom around this, but there are lots of opportunities as well.
Yeah, some of the digital journals are really exciting. Certainly in France, La Vie des Idées or Context, got some really great work and very distinguished academics contributing to them. So it's something to look out for. I've put a few other resources up here as well, which might tap into the open access debate and other issues that we're all facing. So on Twitter, the hashtag early career researcher chat and hashtag PhD chat. And you can follow the Times Higher Education Supplement, and also the AHRC and the British Academy and so on are obviously present on Twitter as well. And these two websites, Vitae, that you might know already, and PhD to Published is a website that was set up by a couple of PhD students in the UK as they were finishing their PhD, and it's got loads of resources about academic writing in particular. It's quite a good one if you've got a bit of writer's block. They've got some good tips and tricks on there. So you might want to have a look at those things there. And that's most of what I was going to say, really. Just some things to remember that unfortunately you won't make your millions in academic publishing, but there's lots of symbolic reward. And again, the point about not submitting to more than one journal, submitting your best work, but remembering that all your work is work in progress. Okay, so you don't need to hold on to it for too long. I mean, your ideas are going to develop. Everyone's ideas do develop. If an article is rejected, don't panic. And this was another one of my peers. The best advice was from a journal that rejected my article. I didn't want to accept the reviews at the time. It was a bitter pill to swallow. But now that I'm revising my thesis for publication, I agree with much of what was said. It was thorough and gave me a different perspective on my research. Something to bear in mind. The last 2 points speak for themselves, really. Working on projects simultaneously, bearing in mind that to get an article published could take 2 years or even more. Obviously, you need to keep juggling things at the same time. And just to remember that you're doing your research and that it's the research itself which is the most important thing. Okay? It's not these, the bigger institutional narratives are very important increasingly as you develop in your career. You'll realise that, but keep a hold of why you started doing academic research in the first place. Okay? Is there any questions?
Just a quick question about sort of impact and impact projects. Is there any way to find out how you get involved with these things, what different things universities are working on and different things that universities have? Because one of the things that I found is there is things out there, but how you actually find out about them is it's quite difficult. There's not going to be a database of impact projects, but finding out about different things you could get involved in.
Depends on the university. Some universities do have a bit on their homepage where it will actually say impact, and you can go through and look at their current impact studies, case studies, and those you might see a way in which you could then link your research into an ongoing project at a current institution. My sense is that some of these things come together in a kind of organic way, and some of them are more actively instigated. The job that I'm about to start, I think I'm expected to kind of push forward something like an impact case study, and that's quite a daunting prospect at the beginning when you're not sure. We could spend hours debating what we mean by impact: short-term impact, long-term impact, immediate impact. What does, how do we measure impact? Obviously, for myself, the lottery project that I've been working on, the bookshop project in North London, was a wonderful project, but it was a stroke of luck because it fits nicely as impact in some ways. So keeping an eye out on other mailing lists, perhaps adjunct mailing lists to your normal academic mailing lists that you're looking at.
Can I think this is absolutely, it's an essential area, and I don't think universities are currently very good at including this sort of activity in postgraduate training, or even staff training as well, or more generally into the postgraduate experience. What is being professionalised, and it's a new career pathway to be an impact manager, and lots of universities have them now. Just a couple of things I'd say. The first is, I think it's important to distinguish, as we were saying before, between outreach, knowledge transfer, knowledge exchange, public understanding, whatever you want to call it, which are all really good things. And I think that we've got to be committed to, particularly in modern languages. One of the perennial problems is that there's a failure of people, not just outside universities, but inside universities, to understand what modern linguists do. I think we just teach people language. They don't understand this rich range of activities that are going to be showcased in the papers today. So I think engagement in that sort of activity is really useful. And institutionally, you'll find that there are a lot of places, and you mentioned this already in the case of Westminster, but most places have sort of privileged relationships often with local but also with national external partners, and as a postgraduate, there are possibilities to get involved there. There's always lots of very interesting schoolwork to be done through roots of languages, which can be research-based. So there's that. Impact much more technical, because and this is part of this research excellence framework, which for people not planning to work in UK academia, well, it's coming in various places, but this is quite sort of parochial and national. But there are all sorts of issues there. First of all, impact case studies can't be dependent on postgraduate work, so that they've got to be based on the work of full-time faculty staff. And that's not to say that through research groupings or clusters, postgraduate researchers can be involved. And I think it's actually essential to get to experience this sort of idea. The other thing is, it's more to do with departmental culture than individuals. So, for example, and this is where there's a lot of learning to be done here. The work you've done as part of the PhD might not necessarily be eligible for if you move to another department, because it's the department in which the research was done that can take credit for any impact emerging from that research. That's not everybody does that, and work carries on. It's like open access. These are the big political issues at the moment, and it's really, I think it's important not just to get a sense of what it's all about, but also to get involved where possible. Next year, when the results come out, there's a commitment on the part of the funding councils to organise this REF exercise to transparency. So there's going to be an incredible bank of impact case studies that will be published on the web. And so we're going to get a really good sense of the sort of work in this area that's going on across the sector. And I think that's going to be invaluable. What we're not necessarily going to get a sense of is what was rated high, what was rated low. But nevertheless, to get an idea of what this means and what it might look like in specific disciplinary contexts, so that information is going to be available.
So when will that be?
Well, there's sort of a drip effect. So the initial sort of raw results come out and will go out in December. Then as 2015 progresses, there are 3 or 4 stages at which you get the results with a greater degree of granularity. Then each panel produces a report on the subject area, which is very interesting reading as well. And then the institutional submissions are published. So it'll be sort of throughout the first few months of 2015. But I think one of the main things to say is that it's the first time it's been included in research assessment, and not many people know what's going on. So in some ways this was sort of a pilot, and it's the next one that will be important. There'll be a sense then in 2020 that we should all know what we're doing.
Right. Okay, great. Any other? Yeah.
Yeah, I want to ask, you were talking about using a conference paper to then have an article published and then incorporating that into a thesis. I was wondering how compatible is it with the aim eventually to getting your thesis published as a monograph? Obviously you've got to modify your thesis sometimes quite substantially, but will some people refuse a contract because part of that research is going to be published? Or?
That's a really important question, yeah. I think you should limit yourself to 2 or 3 articles from the thesis if you then want to publish it as a monograph.
I'm on the editorial committee of Legenda, which publishes short monographs, and I think our percentage is 20%. It's a rough idea that no more than a certain proportion of the work proposed should have been published already. But because the monographs in that series are so short, you can actually divide up your thesis conceptually and say, I have to put a monograph and 2 articles. And think of it in that way. So your thesis might not be the book, it might be the book as an article.
Just add something there, because I'm chair of the board of the University Press, and it's difficult because with more established academics, sometimes we will allow more pre-published. But with a PhD, more than 2 chapters published already as articles, the questions are raised. Linked in with that, though, this is where blogging is so interesting. And a number of publishers are still very reluctant to publish work that has been pre-circulated on blogs. Academic work, yeah. I'm not sure if that will change, but no, I've seen it on a number of occasions. Although I endorse it now, and I don't know whether those who have used blogs creatively will want to say things. I think it's a really important area. But that is developing in a number of ways. One thing I've seen that's really interesting, I don't know whether you've seen this in pitching on the one for your book, a number of publishers now on the proposal form have a section which is what do you propose in terms of the digital visibility of this. And so a number of publishers are expecting you might have a blog linked to the book. And it's a lot of work. I have a blog and I'm very poor at keeping it up to date. But I think that it's a great opportunity, you said this, Ruth, if you use a blog, Twitter, possibly Facebook, but I think blog and Twitter are a really good way of making your work visible. Not using the standard routes, which are also important, but if you go for a job interview, then that's a way the panel can then look at your work that way. And you're dead right, it's a great way for networking and creating international connections in a way that just wasn't possible when we were doing our PhDs.
Yeah. The other link that I had on the page of blogs, we looked at one. The other one is one called Africa Writes. I know there are a few Africa specialists here. Africa Writes is an excellent blog run by a group of PhD students from the University of Sussex. And they have an international panel of collaborators for it. And so that's something to think about, setting up a blog with a group of your peers. But also Africa Writes accepts guest edits, so you can contribute to a blog which is already running. And Africa Writes is a bit lacking on the Francophone side, so I'm sure if you were to contact them, they might be interested in your work if you work on Africa.
Just one question: is it preferable to publish in English? Because it seems that the tradition is that a lot of even though it's discussing French works and such, usually the articles are being published in English, but I don't know, it just varies because I'm from Canada and usually like our thesis and everything, the requirement is that you write it in French. But here there's more flexibility, and I think even in the US that you can write in English your entire thesis, but sometimes they say that because for publication purposes it might be easier to publish it in English because you're going to have a more wider, like, people reading. I don't know.
This is something, Jenny, I know that you've published in French and English quite substantially.
I think that in rough terms it doesn't make any difference.
Makes no difference whatsoever.
So in terms of your saleability on the jobs market, it doesn't matter. I'm not sure that it's actually easier to publish in English, in the sense that, so I publish my thesis in French, I made them in French. But so there's a market within France, but it's a much smaller market. It's a smaller academic market. French universities don't have their money to buy books. So if you could aim for individuals, then sell books for individuals, but that's not really what you're aiming to do. As for example, I've sold more copies of my first book in French than any since, because it was bought by individuals, but less by university libraries. So in terms of your career progression, it may be better to publish in English with a more academic publishing company. But in for the ref, I think the academic publishing companies are more recognized.
Can I ask, does it sometimes happen? Because often you read a text that was initially published in one language and then you find a second or third edition that's been translated. So if you published something in, say, English because you felt you needed to get into the French, I'm thinking my thesis would not appeal to a French market if I just gave it to them cold kind of thing. It's not really, as you said, it's not really part of French academia. But if it sort of gained momentum through an Anglophone market, could you then find that you might get an offer to translate it into
the book rather than
but yeah, if you
sounds
ideal. I'm just wondering if that ever happens, if you're trying to get into a market but you realise the direct route might not necessarily be the best one, if something gets quite a lot of positive criticism and reception and use through English initially, can then sometimes be translated and put into it.
Yeah, it does happen.
Yes. I don't think it would count twice though in your exhibition.
No, it does.
So you would certainly have it with esteem indicator.
Yeah, and you see, there's an issue, going back rather boringly to this research excellence framework, which drives hiring, so you've got to talk about it. There's an issue of overlap and duplication. And so, we have cases where people will simply submit a translation of a piece of work as if it's new work. You can't do that, and it's, it just gets graded unclassified. But I think it's really important that in certain quarters, and I don't think I'd go this far, but I actually think, on principle, as modern linguists, we should be publishing bilingually. And the big question, there are some people in French studies who would say that, that you're not just a credible French studies scholar if you haven't got at least a proportion of your work in French, being published in France or Canada or in Africa or whatever. So, but the key question is one that you both mentioned. It's the quality. If it's being published, if it's being rigorously peer reviewed, and the work you're producing is of excellent quality, it should make any difference which language you publish it in. And I think we're one of those. Because in France, looking at in France at the moment, it's depressing in some ways to see, because there's this obsession with world university rankings. And to do well in world university rankings, you have to be you have to be publishing with Anglophone publishers. There's this push to move people to publish in English. That there's a large project to translate a number of leading French novels into English. And the sort of linguistic ecosystem is being damaged as a result, in my view. So no, but I don't think it makes any difference. And I've had experiences both ways. So stuff's being published in English and then has found a French translator, but the other way around as well. And so it can happen. And I think translation is great because it just gives you a new audience. And that ultimately we want to be
That's
read.
what we want, yeah.
There are specialised journals that are published in France in sort of narrower fields. So French studies is very broad brush, and I think a lot of the more prestigious journals are. But if you're working on a particular author, you might publish in a specialist journal, and they will often be French, and therefore you have to publish for the moment in French. So if I'm working on Balzac, the theoretical thing might be for French studies, but if there's a specific sort of narrower piece on Balzac, then there are bulletins and society journals in particular areas.
Any
Sorry, question.
It's not related.
Can you expand on your slide on types of publication? I can't remember whether you said collaboration or writing. I just interested because I think it's a great idea that you can write things with other people, and it's not just co-editing. You can co-author.
Yeah.
You can even co-author with a supervisor with all the caveats around making sure they're stealing best ideas to recover their jaded career. But I think there's. I don't know what I'm interested to hear what was behind that, because there are no reasons why, as a postgraduate, you might sort of find there's a historian or a geographer who has similar interests. Why don't we pool our resources and write something together, which would probably be a lot stronger.
Yeah.
But was that the idea?
That was the idea. Yeah. I'm doing a collaborative piece with a French sociologist at the moment, and it's really helpful in lots of ways methodologically. It's also, but when I took it to the journal editors, they were a bit resistant to the fact it being co-authored, probably because we're two unknowns, and also because they thought that it can sometimes be uneven in terms of the written style and the texture of what you then write. So it adds. I found it really exciting. I'm just working through the editing process at the moment. There's lots of to and fro, lots of Skypes and so on, and it's fantastic. It's great, but
in the science it's 30, 40 years. I don't know but no, there's a conservatism there, really frustrating.
I'm not sure never to co-edit anything or collaborate with anyone because my surname starts with Y. So in a forced and ye collaboration, always
to be university. No, not necessarily. No, but it's a serious point. That's something that you talk about at an early stage, because the ordering of the names can be seen as important.
if we're 35, then
I've seen people falling out over that. Co-edited, co-authored pieces, and the alphabetical assumption. I think you're doing that. An editor who says that is assuming that a single authored article isn't going to be uneven. I've seen plenty of uneven single. That's just
I think we're out of time. Unless there is.
Is there any more questions?
I was just wondering at what point in the publication process you put a publication on your CV?
As soon as, as soon as you've had confirmation they want it.
As soon as you've had
Put it forthcoming. Yeah.
I would put in preparation before you submit it. When it's submitted.
Okay.
And forthcoming.
It's a really great question. Yeah, no, I agree. Because I've in job application process, I've seen this audited. And people are getting in all sorts of trouble. That there's sort of aspirational wish lists of stuff they might do over the next 5 years. No, I would. No. If it genuinely is, because the worst thing that can happen is you can put something down as completed or in preparation, and they will say as part of the process, could you send us a copy of it? And then it gets rather embarrassing. You're dead right. There are different stages there. In preparation means it could be an idea, but then.
I wouldn't do it. It's just an idea. You're going to have a fairly.
But anything you put down, you've got to be prepared to have it audited and to be able to provide the evidence.
Yeah.
And if you don't, obvious conclusions will be drawn.
I think you can, once you've maybe submitted to a journal, you can say under review.
Yeah.
That might be the safest.
Yeah. But again, sometimes it happens and you push and actually it isn't at all. So then you
Because you could have said nothing
But I think it's really important to show that so if you put a whole series of articles, this one's published, this one's forthcoming, this one's under review, you can see that the person is productive. And that's what an employer wants to see. Unless it's right before a deadline, which is basically produced.
Unless you send out 5 or
Sorry.
No, it's okay. Thanks everyone. Just before I just wanted to say thank you for coming, but also I'm really sorry that I'm now going to have to run off because I've got to go back to Oxford to play in a concert. And yeah, I'd invite you all, but you'll all be here having fun. So I'm really sorry because the papers look excellent, and I'd certainly be looking out for them in future publications. And I hope the rest of the day goes really well.
Thank you.